All right, so I think we are live. I'll kick things off. We're right at 2 o'clock, so hopefully folks are finding their way in all right. I'll give us, a minute or so just to let everyone make their way in. Hopefully the Zoom doesn't give anyone any problems. Yeah, excited to be here today to talk to everyone about Medicaid. Can be kind of a hairy subject, but hopefully we can shed some light on it. So yeah, thank you everyone who's joining us live. And of course, this is also going to be or is being recorded. So you'll be able to access this afterwards, and we'll certainly be sharing out the slides afterwards as well. And let me go ahead and share my screen so that y'all can see what I'm talking about. That'll definitely make the presentation a little bit better. Cool. So yeah, happy Wednesday, everybody. Last day of May. Hopefully folks had a nice Memorial Day weekend and are ready for summer to get started. All right, we'll go ahead and start things off. I know folks are probably still making their way in, but just to keep things moving along. So we have our webinar, pulling the thread on Medicaid unwinding. I don't know how much folks have heard about Medicaid unwinding, but certainly by the end of this webinar, you will have learned lots about it. It's been ongoing and will continue going on for the next probably year or so. So wanted to make sure that everyone in the PH community is aware of what's going on and knows what to do about it. So as we're kicking off, I do just want to give a shout out to our program sponsors, both the PHA Connects and the Treatment Access Program, collaborating together to put this webinar out there for y'all, and certainly couldn't do it without the help of our sponsors. So thank you there. All right, I'll dive into things. So this is kind of a basic outline of what we're going to get into. What is Medicaid unwinding? Why is it happening? And what should you do to maintain your insurance coverage if you do happen to have Medicaid? So right up front, I just wanted to share these additional resources. This very first link is the link to medicaid.gov. That's actually going to bring you directly to the page that has each state's Medicaid contact information and enrollment link. I do want to note there on that page, you will have to scroll down a ways to get to, there's a map of all 50 states, and then below that, a list that has all of those elements there to help you find the right links. So it is on that page, but you have to scroll to it. The second link there, healthcare.gov, the Marketplace Health Exchange has a lot of really great resources about coverage. So particularly if you end up finding yourself losing Medicaid coverage, that is a especially good resource to turn to, and they just have a lot of good information there in general. And then lastly, those bottom two links are just kind of good information to have a little bit of a deeper dive on the issue if anyone's interested in kind of the policy behind Medicaid unwinding, as well as the regulations that states are going to be held to. Those definitely give you a very good overview there. So what is Medicaid unwinding? That is basically when states are now at the point where they're starting back up their annual Medicaid eligibility reviews. So this is a thing that used to happen every year. It was paused during the pandemic. I'll get more into that in a little bit. But basically what's happening now is Medicaid agencies have to first attempt to complete an automated renewal of all of their enrollees based on information that's available, like through wage information from state databases or information in SNAP files, things like that. If the state agency is not able to do that automated renewal, then they send a renewal notice and request for more information to those enrollees that couldn't get automatically re-enrolled. So when those enrollees respond, the agencies will process those cases, renew coverage for those who are still eligible, and give a notification to those who are not eligible any longer. So the problems arise when enrollees don't, for whatever reason, get the request for information, often due to having changed their address or phone number, or if they don't understand what they're supposed to do, anything like that can kind of lead to these, what we're calling procedural disenrollments. So that's what I'm trying to raise awareness about today and make sure it doesn't happen to anyone. Well, to anyone, period, would be the ideal goal, but hopefully that it happens to fewer people. So how this Medicaid unwinding works. The coverage terminations started in 5 states on April 1st. So those 5 states are Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, New Hampshire, and South Dakota. And don't worry, I am going to show you a map on the next slide that kind of gives you the big picture of where all these states stand. So April 1st was the effective date of their first coverage terminations. So they were already doing that like automated re-enrollment, or re-enrollment in like the previous month in March, but then having to give that 30 days before they could start those terminations. So another 15 states set a date of May 1st, and then all but one of the remaining 50 states set a date in either June or July. So coming up very soon would be when these things start. Now, I do want to note the Medicaid agencies have 12 months to initiate renewals, so they didn't have to start as soon as they did, but a lot of states have started by now, and more, most all will have started sending out the renewals by the end of the summer. And then they still have 14 months to complete the renewals. So this is intended to allow states to spread out the workload. It's certainly not going to occur as a single event. This process is going to be very time consuming for state agencies, certainly going to take through the rest of 2023 and likely well into 2024. And I will say CMS has issued guidance for states on how this is supposed to go down. They have extensive guidance and best practices that they should be following when consider unwinding, and they are subject to fines if they are not transparent in their processes. So for what that's worth, that has been put into place. So here's that map I mentioned. Here in the dark blue, you have those 5 states that started in April. And then in the medium blue here are those 14 states that started in May. And then, as you can see, the majority of states, another 22, are going to be starting as of, I believe, June 1st, or at least within June. So that's going to be most of the states, and then just the remainder in July, and then the very last holdout, Oregon, starting in October. So that you can see there kind of visually where they're at. I will say we do actually have some initial unwinding data that has already been released from several states, especially since we saw 5 of them starting back in April. And we unfortunately are seeing that the vast majority of people have lost coverage because of administrative issues at this point. So specifically in Arkansas, Florida, and Indiana, around half, between 45 and 55% of the Medicaid enrollment cases that states have already taken action on have led to coverage terminations. So about half the cases that they're looking at are getting terminated. Of those ones that have been terminated, more than 80% of those, that coverage loss was because individuals couldn't be located or failed to respond to notices or other procedural issues like I was mentioning. So this is looking to be something that is definitely concerning. PHA is certainly monitoring this and taking it very seriously. I would say it suggests that there's problems not just with the notices and the renewal forms getting to enrollees, but probably also just a lack of adequate public education campaigns, and likely also probably a challenge with just consumer support available from Medicaid agencies, just because of the volume of individuals trying to renew their coverage. So a little bit more background on just exactly why this is happening. As I mentioned, it kind of has to do with COVID. So back in March 2020, this was part of the COVID-19 relief that was enacted in that Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Congress provided increased Medicaid funding to states. So to get this funding, states had to meet several requirements. It was collectively called a maintenance of effort requirement, and then also a continuous coverage requirement. That one in particular prohibited states from terminating most Medicaid enrollees coverage until after the end of the public health emergency. So during continuous coverage, Medicaid agencies were not allowed to disenroll anyone from Medicaid unless they specifically asked to be disenrolled, or if they moved out of state, or if they passed away. So continuous coverage, certainly allowed millions of people to stay covered without any interruption during the pandemic. Certainly a major reason why we didn't see an increase really in the uninsured rate during the height of the pandemic. So now fast forward to December 2022, late last year, Congress passed a bill that ended the continuous coverage requirement. So that took effect on March 1st of this year. So that legislation is, where we have those procedures for states during the unwinding process where they're required to maintain transparency and, attempting to mitigate coverage losses. Obviously, what we're seeing right now is not super promising, but we're hoping to, to see some federal kind of influence, or, however it ends up happening, that the states get off to a better start than things have gone so far. So all that being said, here's kind of what to do about it. So I know that was an intense kind of spew of information. I will say, if anyone has questions, if y'all could please use the Q&A function rather than the chat, that allows us to save those questions and then I can respond to them later. I am by no means an expert in Medicaid at all, but I will certainly try to look into any questions that folks have, and we'll share out some more resources as we see kind of what things folks are trying to learn about. And I'll pause here just for a moment to see if there's any questions. I am actually not able to see the Q&A, so I guess, Angela, if you're able to.
No questions.
No
there
questions.
Are questions right now.
Sorry, you said no questions?
That's correct. People just wanted the links in the chat, which I've done that.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. Much appreciated. All right, so we'll keep trucking along. If y'all do have questions later on, certainly, like I said, pop them down there in the chat, and I'll try to, potentially I'll attempt to speak to them today. But like I said, if I don't have those answers, then we'll certainly gather some more resources for folks as we learn kind of what specific aspects the PH community is interested in learning more about. So just to dive in a little bit more into these procedural disenrollments that I was mentioning. So as these different states are going through their own unwinding processes, we're looking at literally millions of people, including large numbers of whom would still be eligible for Medicaid, could potentially be losing their coverage and becoming uninsured, or at least having a gap in coverage. So this is going to happen, like I said, largely due to paperwork barriers or other challenges. Any out-of-date contact information or just postal misdelivery could also be an issue for that form not getting received, or even if the form is received, might not be completed due to language barriers. It could be a case of just the renewal forms can be confusing. Sometimes those action steps for enrollees might not be clear. An enrollee might not have access to the document that they need to prove their eligibility, but they are still eligible. Or it's possible even if that form is successfully completed, it still could end up getting lost, whether that's getting lost in the post or if the state agency is not well organized and is getting inundated with all this paperwork. It's possible that things could get lost in the shuffle. So just a lot of room for concerning errors that really shouldn't be happening. So in order to make sure you're keeping your coverage, the best thing everyone can do right away is to make sure that your contact information is up to date with your state agency. This is especially important if you've moved anytime since 2022. Just got to make sure that Medicaid has a way to reach you. And then beyond that, make sure that you're paying attention to your mail. You want to make sure you're opening anything that you receive from Center of Medicaid and Medicare, from your state Medicaid agency, just as soon as you get it. Make sure that you're responding to it promptly. Don't let it sit in the mail basket or get buried under stuff on the kitchen counter. These things are definitely time sensitive, and you want to make sure you're responding to them as soon as you can. So if you do get a renewal form, it's likely to ask you for documents to prove your eligibility. And there are resources out there to help with the renewal process if you find the forms to be unclear. I will just say, make sure you're keeping in mind, this is a very large undertaking for every state. And we are right now in a time where a lot of those state agencies are already understaffed, still residual from the pandemic. It's going to be a challenging time for those agencies. So you might end up having to contend with long wait times when calling the helpline. Just, potential for a lot of frustrations. But I do know, I will say the PH community is by far not a stranger to long wait times and needing to be patient and tenacious. I know those are strengths that our community has. So I think we all can get through that. Angela, was there a question or something?
Yeah, there was a question that came in.
Awesome. Okay.
What is the process for changing Medicaid from one state to another? I have Florida Medicaid, but may need to relocate to North Carolina for a transplant.
Good to know. That is a great question. I am not certain. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with the process of Medicaid. To be completely transparent, what I personally would do, and what I certainly am happy to do, is to just hop on Google and type that question into Google and just see what comes up. Obviously, some of the resources that come up may be kind of dense, and some folks might find that kind of challenging to read through and figure out what the right steps are. But I think right now, kind of, if you don't know, Googling it is going to be a good starting place. And then beyond that, talking to your care team, they certainly may know a lot about that, insurance kind of transition process. They're going to have more experience than I necessarily do in working with folks who have Medicaid. And if you're working with a transplant team, that's probably pretty common that folks from out of state are coming in to get those transplants done. So there's a good chance that there's going to be some kind of person on staff that would have kind of that patient liaison role who could maybe help walk you through some of that. So definitely try reaching out to that team if you haven't already. And then, like I said, I can try to look into that as well. Any other questions at the moment?
Yes, let me see. I believe there was another one. I'm trying to find it. Thank you for your answer. And then, okay, I think there is an answer just to the question I'll read out loud.
Okay.
You'll probably have to enroll in North Carolina, which can be challenging because there may be a gap between when your Florida coverage ends and your North Carolina coverage starts. I 100% agree with Jaeger's advice to ask your transplant team.
All right, so I'll keep moving along, but definitely, yeah, y'all feel free to put more questions in the Q&A and I'll see what I can answer for y'all. So one other thing I wanted to note, there is a grace period. So if it ends up where you don't manage to get the forms returned in time, but you think you should still be eligible, there is a 90-day grace period where states must accept that renewal paperwork and are required to process it without you having to complete a full new application. So you do have a little bit of wiggle room. I would not recommend banking on that, but just to know there is that little bit of a safety net where you don't have to do a full application if it's been recent that you missed that deadline. So if you do end up losing coverage, probably the best place to start is through a health insurance marketplace. So for the states that use healthcare.gov, like I was mentioning, that's a really great resource. Of course, if you're in a state that has its own health insurance marketplace, those policies are going to vary by state. So your best bet's going to just be to kind of go to your state's marketplace website, figure out what those details are, see if there may be a special enrollment period available. But for healthcare.gov, there is for sure a special enrollment period that's available. So as soon as anyone loses Medicaid coverage, that triggers a special enrollment period. So it would allow you to enroll in marketplace coverage anytime until the end of July of next year of 2024. So it gives like a good long gap of time, which makes sense because this is going to be going on for a while. So folks are going to be finding out about loss of coverage at different times. And one thing to note about healthcare.gov, folks who have income up to 150% of the poverty line can enroll in marketplace coverage at any time, as long as your state uses healthcare.gov. And then also, I would say for most folks losing Medicaid, it's pretty likely that you'll qualify for significant financial help with premiums and out-of-pocket costs in those marketplace plans. So like, for instance, in 2023, 4 out of 5 marketplace enrollees, I guess for the year of 2023, so this would have been while people were enrolling in 2022, but folks qualified for a plan of $10 a month or less. So, pretty likely that you will be finding financial assistance there. And then another thing to take note of, it's possible the marketplace may actually reach out to you, which I know could be a little bit weird for folks, but just wanted to put that out there that is something that could happen when you lose Medicaid or CHIP coverage. Your state is going to securely send your contact information to the marketplace, or at least they may. I don't know if that's the case for every single state, but marketplace is going to use that information that they receive from the state to mail you a letter about marketplace coverage, and might also be following up by like phone or email or text if you've given that information to your state. So you don't have to wait for marketplace to contact you in order to apply for coverage. You can certainly do it on your own, but just to notify people that that message might be coming through. So then another option, if you've lost Medicaid coverage, so there's a 60-day period after losing Medicaid coverage to enroll in an employer-sponsored coverage. So obviously that would be dependent on you having an employer, and specifically one who's offering coverage that is considered affordable. Well, I guess there's the broad employer sponsored insurance, and then a caveat subset of that would be if that plan is considered affordable, which would mean that it does not exceed 9% of your household income, then you would likely not be eligible for financial assistance in a marketplace plan. So that would mean that the employer sponsored insurance would be better in that case. But for most folks, the marketplace coverage is going to likely be the better deal because of that financial assistance. But regardless, if there is an employer-sponsored insurance plan out there, you'll have 60 days of losing Medicaid coverage to enroll in that. So make sure that you're aware of kind of what those options are. If you're able to look that up ahead of time, or just get assistance with kind of exploring those options. The sooner the better is kind of the best recommendation there. And then specifically for CHIP coverage, so it's possible even if a parent or another adult in the household loses that Medicaid coverage, you'll want to still just make sure to check for Medicaid or CHIP coverage for children. The income eligibility cutoffs for coverage are actually higher for children than they are for adults. So it's certainly possible that a child would still retain coverage even if their parent loses it. So that's kind of the main part to be aware of there. And just broadly, if children are not eligible for CHIP, it's still possible that they would be get subsidized coverage through the marketplace. So in either direction, even if that eligibility is no longer there for Medicaid or CHIP, there should still be some financial assistance available. And then lastly, I just wanted to give kind of a broad warning that this is potentially a time where scams, there might be an uptick there, and just kind of a reminder to everybody, this is true all of the time, but especially right now. Do not share your personal information, and especially do not give any money to anyone who calls you up or contacts you in any way, saying that you have to pay them to keep Medicaid or CHIP coverage or to apply into Marketplace. Your state and Marketplace is never going to threaten you or threaten anyone in your household or ask for your credit card information or any kind of payment to keep or to qualify for your health insurance. So if that does happen to you, there are ways to report it, but just above all, make sure that you're keeping your personal information, especially your social security number, protected. Don't give that out. You should not have to give that out. If you have that form, it might be a part that's required on the form, but you're certainly not going to be required to send it through over the phone or anything unsecure like that. So that is everything that I've got on this. Angela, are there any other questions that have come through?
No other questions.
All right. Well, I hope that this was informative, and I guess just thank you all for tuning in. And it was great talking with y'all. So happy Wednesday, everyone.